Hi, Richard. Welcome to the show.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm fine. Hope you're doing well over there.
Yes, it's lovely and damp and mild in London here. You probably don't get winter in Canada, but we
Oh,
we we
I live on the East Coast. We got snow outside and it's -9 degrees. I got
that
no,
was a joke. I hitchhiked across Canada when I was 18 in March, and it was nippy.
yeah, yeah.
And then 4 or 5 days later, we flew to Yellowknife, Resolute Bay, and Prince Patrick Island, and I was
Okay,
working on Prince Patrick Island. I was the
that's
North.
cold. That's cold. I come
Great,
from
great
Toronto
adventure for
where
an eight. Yeah, I was
it
18.
was
It's a great
pretty
adventure.
winter. Yeah.
I loved it. Yeah.
So we're here to talk about specifically one book, your latest book, and we'll talk about other things that you've been involved with before. And in the spirit of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got to the point where you wrote this book?
Right. Well, I've been a writer all my life and a comedy writer since university days. There's quite a tradition in English universities of, well, the university wits, they used to call us back in the 17th century. And in the post-war period, for example, as Oxford and Cambridge produced Peter Cook, Dudley Moore, Alan Bennett, and Jonathan Miller, and then the Monty Python team. And then my generation of people like Douglas Adams, Mel Smith, Griff Rhys-Jones, and a couple of years after me, Rowen Atkinson, are all funneled through Oxford and Cambridge and mainly did student reviews at the Edinburgh Festival. So everyone met everyone up there. I met Douglas Adams when he was doing the Cambridge Review and I was doing the Oxford Review. And I'm, like Douglas, mainly a writer, but they made you be in it if you're a student. So we had a bit of practice at getting up on the stage and mainly feeding lines to the funny people. But it was great fun as a student, and I never wanted to be an actor, thank goodness. But when you get a talent like Rowan coming along, you look at him and you go, "Oh, that's the real thing, all right."
Yes.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned so many names there, and every single one of them I resonate with. I love the British humor. Rowan Atkinson's brilliant, and John Cleese had
Pythons.
had you
I've
write
actually
something for
worked.
him.
Well, I've worked with them all except Terry Gilliam. And when I say work with, I've had a small piece in a show that they might have been a part of with something they'd written. They probably didn't even know I was there. Although Terry Jones and Michael Palin are friends. Well, Terry's now dead. And Graham Chapman. We were all at the same small agency in London, Jill Foster, with Douglas Adams and various other good writers, like Gail Renard, a Canadian alumnus of Montreal, who she was my writing partner for a while. Michael Palin and Terry Jones left to go with the Python agency that formed, and Graham stayed with Jill. So we all bumped into each other at the Christmas parties that our agent would have. And they were my great heroes, some of them at the time, and it was lovely to meet that generation, only a few years older than me, passing on their encouragement. I mean, for example, once Douglas, when he was doing Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was originally a radio series, he went and read the first script at the BBC with the producer. I think it was Simon Brett. It might have been Jeff Perkins. Anyway. He went and read the script, and Terry Jones was sitting there and they were hoping that he would, really be excited by it. And Terry said, "Well, I'm sure it's really good because you've written it, but I'm not sure that I get it." So anyway, so one generation encouraging another. And John Lloyd, who you and I were talking about before we recorded, who I saw at lunch today, he stepped in to help Douglas write the last two scripts for Hitchhiker, because Douglas was running out of steam, and they wrote the last two scripts in 2 weeks. And it was a wonderful radio series. I don't know if you've heard it, but it was such a good cast with people like Simon Jones, the actor Peter Jones. I first heard of it when I was on a first date with a girlfriend who I was very interested in, and went to meet her. We went to the local pub, and there was Jeff McGivern at the bar, nobody else. So I said, "Oh, hi, Jeff, how's it going?" And he said, "Great, Douglas has written a radio show and I'm in it." And I said, "Oh, wonderful, what's it called?" And he said, "Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy." So I said, "Oh, great title," and then rushed off because I didn't want a handsome young actor coming and interfering with my evening. That's the first time I heard the title, and then it became a book years later, uh, um, and then the other books. And Douglas was, it was funny. John said to me last time we met before this, Douglas was hopeless at everything except having brilliant ideas.
Mhm.
They were roommates. They shared a flat. They were at Cambridge together. It's such a great line. But he
I
was.
love,
His
yeah,
ideas were brilliant.
I love that book. I really enjoy Douglas Adams'
Much
writing.
with.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I have a copy of it somewhere, in fact.
Well, Douglas, they moved to, he and Jane, his wife, Jane was at Oxford with me in my year and did English like I did. And they moved to California when Douglas was doing the Hitchhiker films. And I remember he was sitting in our backyard once and I teased him. I said, "Douglas, if I'd written something as brilliant as Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you wouldn't see me for dust. I'd keep churning them out." And he sort of stiffened and said, "Well, it's not as easy as that." Because we all knew Douglas hated writing. He was brilliant at it, but he would much rather sneak off and, for example, play computer games. Like 20 years before I discovered them, I was saying, well, "What are these? Aren't these for kids?" He said, "No, they're amazing. It's the future." And then so a decade after he died, I discovered them, and from them came my new book, which is coming out, and of which I've written 4 in the series now. So
That one is a new rock, new roll.
yes, it's a pun. Role is spelled Role. A rock is a planet, right? Third rock from the sun, the sitcom, and it grew out of my love of role-playing games because I played them for a long time. I still do. Well, I don't get the time now, and I just was thinking, well, what would it really be like to be that guy in that amazing world that the developers and the computer designers have created for us? And I thought, well, there's only way to find out. There's only one way. You have to write it. So it's not set in the game or anything, but it comes out of, I mean, the basic setup is 3 people, one of whom is the narrator, based on me, a retired English school teacher, as it were, which I'm not, but and he's just discovers that he loves playing games, is really good at it. And he and his 2 teammates, one of whom's Australian, whose avatar is an orc, and an Asian American girl whose avatar is a dual-wielding samurai sword, kick-ass sword dancer. And he's the battle mage, our hero. And they win the World Series of the World Championship of Sword and Sorcery. And the next thing you know, he's standing in a field in the middle of nowhere with a crappy sword and a shield going, "What the F?" And he's got to figure out how he got there and why, and whether the other 2 people are even there. And he can hear wolves chasing him. So, he's got to survive. And gradually a quest unfolds, and it's all set in a new fantasy world, which is sort of Middle English, medieval, the traditional world for sword and sorcery, castles and taverns and weird creatures. So it grew out of role-playing games, but it's not about a game. And I've just absolutely loved writing them. I'm so lucky to have found this. I say I found my bliss as a writer.
Right. So is it a series or is it just one book
Well, I've
for
written
now?
4. Yes, I mean, when I wrote the first one, I sent it off to my agent, and they always take a couple of months to read anything. And I wanted to find out what happens next. And when I told her a bit about the idea, she said, "This sounds just what people want." So I thought, oh, well, if somebody does publish it, I'd better get ahead of the game and get the next book ready, because it can't just be one book wonder and then they say to you, "Well, you got to write something else." And by then 3 years have gone by, So when she called up and said that she liked it and it was exactly what people were looking for, and it's escapism and it's fun and it's got humor, I said, "Well, I'm already well into the sequel." She said, "Oh, great, 3-book deal." I said, "Oh, it's three now, is it?" Anyway, it's now 4. It's and then after a bit, I said, "Well, let me finish the first 3 books then take it to market, because then you got a body of work."
Yeah.
Because publishers don't publish books; they publish authors. And I'm an established script writer and librettist, but as an author, I was and am unknown. So it's a risk. It's an investment, and they want to know what they're going to get further down the pike.
Yeah.
And if you've got a series, you could say it's the first in the New Rock series, which it is. they go, okay, well, if people like the first one, they'll possibly like the second and the third. And then you get a fan base, as it were, growing. All this I've learned in the last few years while I've been writing them. But really, you know, it's just the thrill of finding this amazing opportunity to flourish as a writer. And I'm not saying it's always been easy. You know, it's sometimes you have to throw away a lot of pages, and you know you're struggling to get where you need to go. But looking back, it all makes sense.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, this book, New Rock, New Roll, is there a message behind it, or is it just pure fun and adventure? Or are you trying to say something with the humor?
Oh, I think you can't help saying things in any book. You're much freer to go to many more places in fantasy than you are writing gritty realism. You know, if I was writing about people struggling with the opioid epidemic in Minnesota, you know, you've got a closed world and it's a very important subject, and a writer who's skilled at that kind of work will do a good job at it. But you're limited. In fantasy, you can go anywhere and do anything, as long as it makes sense. And there is fantasy holds up a distorting mirror to reality, is the way I can put it. And we see through the lens of, or through Lewis Carroll's Looking Glass, we see our own selves reflected, magnified perhaps, and our problems minified, you know, made smaller, put into proportion. And there's a line I love in The Lord of the Rings where Frodo's looking up at the stars and he's thinking, well, at least we can't get up there and mess those up. You know, so big themes come in all sorts of types of literature. And the first great work in English is fantasy, Beowulf. It's got a dragon, it's got a hoard of gold, it's got a monster who comes into the mead hall and tears the arms off, eats the warriors, and then the hero comes and kills it and dives to the bottom of the lake and kills its mother, and that's heroic stuff.
Yeah.
And then you get the Fairy Queen is fantasy, half of Shakespeare's fantasy. And what about other cultures? The Arabian Nights is fantasy. This is where we express it. I mean, all religions are fantasy. Stories that we make up to explain the world, whether they're true or not. I'm not saying they're not true, but they're stories and they're ways that we explain the world to ourselves.
Yeah. Something we all try and do anyway, whether we realize it or not, try and make sense of this world. The cover of the book is very interesting. Does this appeal to a younger generation? Or who's it appeal?
Well, 2 points. First of all, the cover artist is brilliant. She's a Norwegian woman
nice.
who lives in Glasgow, Scotland, but it's just a great, I mean, it just says fun. I have 4 test readers who've read all 4 of the books, one of whom is, I think, just turned 80. And I got a new test reader down the road here in London who came in yesterday to talk about it. He was 13. And he was just saying how much he loved it and this, and can't wait to read the sequel, and his favorite character was that. So it appeals to anyone who it's not young adult fiction, but then Milo's a very mature 13-year-old and reads everything. So it seems to hit the spot with people of all. Barbara, who's nearly 80, said, I don't know anything about gaming and I don't need to. You know, she's perfectly happy with the world and the mysteries and the magic and the mayhem. And so that's nice feedback, to think that you've hit the spot with all sorts of different people. And I hope that it continues to do so.
Yeah. Listening to you talk, I'm reminded of when I read the book Animal Farm to my son, and he maybe was 7 or 8 years old. He heard the story as the animals learn how to talk, and the pigs wear clothes and smoke cigars and listen to records, and the mean old farmers kicked off the farm. But we know as adults that it's really about communism and the Russian Revolution.
Oh, it spoils it when you know that. It's about pigs.
Well, it does. You know, for kids, and they wouldn't understand it. So
but the
80-year-old versus the 13-year-old can see it 2 different ways and yet be entertained equally.
Yeah, but you know, to say that it's about communism is kind of both inaccurate and accurate. It's about a fairy tale version of communism. It's about a communistic fantasy with talking animals. I mean, it's a beautifully executed metaphor and very sharp too. And by the
It
way,
is.
his
It
wife was
is.
responsible for a lot of that, by the way. The
But from
credit
what I recall, and I've read it a couple of times, it says that this doesn't work because
yeah,
eventually one member of the animal kingdom is going to think of themselves as being more equal.
being the king. Well, yeah, if you were to read Marx as an analyst now, and the way that he talks about the rentier society, which is happening a lot with people can't afford places to live now, so they're going back to renting, and the rich classes get richer and the poor get poorer. His analysis of that was very accurate back in the 40s. His solutions to what to do about it have been proved by time not to work. Why? Because human beings aren't altruistic. We're naturally selfish, we're naturally corrupt, and you cannot instigate an idealistic society unless you have a better species to do it. So communism as a system has failed. It doesn't work. But his analysis to say this is the problem with the world, it needs still to be paid attention to, because inequality. I mean, why is America so riddled with homelessness? The richest society in the world. Why can't anything be done about that? I'm just an ideas guy. I'm not a politician. I don't know how hard it is to get programs in place, and many people don't want to be taxed and think someone else is living off me and all that. That's where writers come in, is to point out stories and point out ideas, and then people think, oh, yes, we need to do something about that.
Yeah.
And that's Orwell was absolutely brilliant at it.
Yeah. So your book or the series is that attempting to give hope?
It's not trying to do anything. The story reveals itself as you go along, and you realize that there are hidden depths here. I mean, I think if you ever intend as a writer to write something with a message, you're writing a lecture. You want to let it be a show. There are various writers you can look at. Shaw, for example, keeps going off script and writing lectures instead of plays. He's very good at it. But the moment you start trying to drive a message home, you're not doing your first job, which is to involve the reader in a narrative sequence and to sweep them away. If a book doesn't have narrative drive, I tend to lose patience with it now. And I studied English literature, so I know how to trudge through something because it's good for me. But I don't particularly enjoy that as a form of entertainment. If it gets me, then I can see the hidden depths in it. That's heaven.
Okay.
So I'm not trying to do anything, but there's a lot of everything any writer writes reveals a lot about themselves. So obviously there are issues that matter to me that are in there, but they're not anything but color. I'm not trying to make a point.
Sure.
Just trying to tell the story.
Yeah. And so right now there's one book of the 4 that's available.
Yeah, well, it's not available until the 12th of December, and the audiobook comes out a week later. And I did the audiobook myself, which was a little scary. It's great fun, and I did it because 2 of the producers in LA, who are my reading critics, my test readers, they both said, I was asking who should we get to read it, and they both said, well, when I read the book, I hear your voice. You should do it. So I sort of took a deep breath. I thought, oh, okay, why not? And I got Fred Sanders produced it. He did the Game of Thrones, Roy Dotrice. So he's very good at, saying just go for it, just do it, don't worry about it. You know what they sound like. You know how the sentences work.
Yes.
You don't worry about what you're not doing. Just have fun.
Yeah.
It was fun doing it, actually. Yeah.
It was in a studio, I take it.
Yeah. Proper studio in Los Angeles with a proper producer. He also directed me very well. And
and where is that available?
That will be available on the 19th from Blackstone Audio, via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the merchants, amazon.co.uk over this side of the Atlantic where I am at the moment.
I like audiobooks.
I do too. I listen to more audiobooks now than I read, and that's because I go for a walk every day to get my 10,000 steps in. And I listen to, I'm just listening to Stephen Fry reading Sherlock Holmes. He's such a good reader. and
Yeah.
and the stories are
Oh,
amazing.
yeah, I bet. Sure.
Yeah, and I love it when when
When
good story in your ears, wandering around,
Mhm.
lost. You
When's the
know.
second book going to be released? Sometime in
Oh, well, they'll
2024?
release them. They'll release them year by year. But if you go to the website richardsparks.com, there's no E in Sparks. You can get a free audio chapter to listen to or download it, and you can also get a free sample chapter of the book. Both of which are chapters that have quite a bit of humor in them. So one of those is the one that I read at conventions, and they usually get a few laughs in the room.
Hmm.
Uh, like for example, it's not all combat. A beautiful new world like that is there's so much more than just going on quests and sorting things out. I like a book that you can wallow in, and I always when I get to a book where I'm going, I can't wait to see how it ends. I don't want it to end. That's when I hit the sweet spot as a reader. So I like to kind of give value for money, in that if you're going to take time to read my book, there's going to be plenty for you to get absorbed in, and a world for you to get to know and love, I hope.
Hmm.
Characters who emerged out of the woodwork. And some of them are just, I like them so much they come back in the sequel, or they reappear in the third book. I can't get enough of them. Yeah, it's rolling on. And it's as I said, it's just been a real joy to find my bliss at last as a
Of
writer.
course, I mean, writing for those of us who enjoy it, it is bliss. And you're
It is.
ahead of the game. You've got all these ideas for the 4 books. Beyond that, what do you see for yourself?
Well, I've written the 4 books. I'm now in the early stages of the 5th, and it's really salutary because I'm at that floundering around stage thinking, okay, now where are they going? Who's doing what? Where? I know how it's going to land. You always know where it's going to not necessarily end with plot, but where the book's going to land in the last bit. You have to work that out first. You've got to work your ending out first, and then you go back and you set up your traps and your red herrings and your puzzles, because a lot of questing is figuring out what's going on. There's this mysterious poem that, well, it says this, but what does it mean? How do we solve this? It's also mystical and magical, and they get tied in knots. And so I'm in the tying myself in knot stage in book 5. So when I'm talking about books 1 or 2, 3, 4, as I could, I'm, sort of know what I'm talking about. But book 5, I'm going, what on earth am I doing? It's lovely. I enjoyed that, but without it, you can never know because it hasn't been written yet. But when you look back and you go, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's when you know you've delivered, at least in terms of plot structure.
Yeah. Do you write an outline first, or what I call a synopsis, before you start writing your book, or is it just
Well,
by the seat of your pants?
both. As trained as a scriptwriter, if you're in a room or work with a producer, they say, well, give me a scenario, give me a synopsis. We'll add the dialogue later, is the old Hollywood way of doing it.
Yeah.
So I'm well used to doing that. I found it very odd at first because I just thought you'd start writing and see where you go. But it's actually very helpful to write synopsis. But my answer to that is I do both at the same time. So if I'm writing a chapter, when I get to the end of the chapter, I'll put it in another file saying chapter 5 and a 2-line description of what happens, or 3 lines.
Mm-hmm.
So you're creating the synopsis at the same time as you're creating what may or may not be the book.
Right.
In the 3rd book, it was so complicated at some point. I must have thrown away 200 pages before I boiled it down and it all came clear and made sense. So you have to be prepared to go off piece to bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, the more you can get your outline together, the better it is. But if you think about it like so close to the tree that you can't, all you can see is bark, you can't even see the tree when you're going ahead by the seat of your pants, then you've got to be able to pull focus, get down and look at the whole forest beneath you and think, that's what we got there. So you create another file for your synopsis, scenario, summary, excuse me, and other files for each chapter as you go along. So you've got to be able to work both inside and outside. You've got to be your own editor. It's a very important process to learn how to do. And I've been lucky to have many good script editors I've worked with and many good writers I've worked with as a script editor. And the editor on the book, Leslie Robin, is brilliant. I mean, I can't tell you how good she is. She's really, really helped punch the book up. Because I mean, the first book took 2 months to write, 170,000 words. But there's been a lot of work since, polishing, adding, cutting, and polishing. Editing is where you get the gold.
Yes.
Once you learn that as a writer, it's so liberating. And the first time I went to have a script edited by the first producer in London who gave me a proper job, you know, for network television, I delivered him the script, went back to his office, he opened the page, it was just covered in blue pencil, marks and lines. I felt that I was being disemboweled sitting there. You know, young writer, think my beautiful work or whatever, you know, it's been, what's he doing?
Yeah.
I knew enough not to say anything, but I was just second. And to go page by page, so I'd take my notes like this, almost my hands shaking, take them and I say, oh, great, okay, so I'll do another draft. So I went home and whacked out another draft as fast as I could. And like 2 or 3 days later, took it in or sent it in. And then he called me in. And the next time he went through it, there were like 6 notes in the entire 30 pages. It was a half-hour show. And you go, oh, wow, that's only 6. And then so you see, that's a learning process where you go, it's not about me, it's not personal.
Yeah,
it's about it. And we're all doing it together. The producer's part of this, the actors it belongs to the actors in the end.
Yeah.
And on the set, it belongs to the director. And you're just part of the process. And the sooner you learn that and kind of get out of your own way, the easier it becomes on you. Yeah. And the more fun it becomes. And
as a television editor, I dealt with more notes than anything else. I would have my rough cut done in 2 weeks, but then we would spend the next 2 months just doing notes after notes after notes, all the different levels above me.
Yeah.
And some editors complained about that, but my point was that isn't it better once everyone, you know, who knows, you know, who can see it from a different perspective? It just gets better. It just gets better all the time.
Yeah, and you have to kid yourself. You have to play a game with yourself, which is, I've got a mantra, which is, there is no such thing as a bad note. Now, it's not true. There are terrible notes that people give you, or you give maybe by mistake. Some of them are legendary in Hollywood. But what you've got to realize is that if somebody comes up with a terrible note, yes, it is possible that they're an idiot and they're just some studio executive who's not got a creative bone in his body. Or you didn't explain it well enough in the script and they don't get what you're talking about. So then you need to go away, rewrite the stage directions or the dialogue or whatever it is, so that when they read it, they go, oh, I get it. And then you quite often you go back in the meeting and say, that note you gave me last week's really great because look what's happened with this. And they half the time they've forgotten what the note is. And they look at it and go, oh, great. And they get the credit for having produce something that was helpful, or sometimes they, you know, a good note is always wonderful and you use what you've got. But there are occasions, of course, when people give you stupid notes and they just happen to be rather in the way. So you do the best you can with those. And those are usually on the projects that kind of doomed anyway. You think, well, I'm not sure this is going to work, but they pay you, so you do your best. Mm-hmm. And they do their best, and it sort of ends up as being second rate at best. But the ones where everyone's flying, then you're all in it together, and it's not up to the writer to say it goes like this. You know? Mm-hmm. So
but then with all the stupid notes, we have great war stories, and editors could sit around and have a beer and say, oh, you want to hear a good one? And we try to outdo each other with some really bad decisions that we had to go through. We had to do it.
I can imagine. I mean, the legendary one in Hollywood is My Favorite Martian, the sitcom. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, very much. Yeah.
One day the script came back from the producer or the executive or something. It came back to the writer, whoever, said, circled a line of dialogue, said, a Martian would never say that. that's a classically fabulously silly.
That's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, actually, in a way, it makes sense. But when you look at it front on. It's just, what is this man thinking?
So what do you do about it? I guess change the dialogue.
I think you do what is needed to
Yeah.
survive, for the show to survive.
Yeah. Richard, any final words you want to say before we bid farewell?
Look, comedy and fantasy and adventure, they all fit together.
Mhm.
I said this recently to someone, that comedy is not nice people telling jokes. That is a dinner party. Comedy is about fear and pain and misery, things going wrong, disasters, betrayals, people falling into puddles. But what good adventure doesn't have all that in it? So it lightens the adventure, and you get opportunities during an adventure for really strange comedy to crop up. You listen to the free chapter on richardsparks.com, and there's a bonkers poem that gets discussed by three characters who are on the run for their lives. And it's this very strange piece of critiquing, but it seems to work when you read it. Well, if you like a laugh,
Oh, yeah, I do.
along with an adventure, I do.
I'm definitely going to check it out. And of course, I'll put that description in the description below, your website and all that.
Well, thank you. And if you enjoy it, I'll come back and talk to you next year about the
Please
sequel.
do. Yes, I love to have guests return when they're moving forward and they got more things to say. It's been very, very interesting talking to you, especially all the credits that you have, and we share the same kind of humor.
It's been fun talking to you. I just yesterday got the cover for the second book, and Christina, the artist, has done another wonderful piece of fantasy art. It's
Cool.
very exciting times.
Great stuff. Okay, Richard, well, you take care of yourself now.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for watching. And before you go, if you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. You can even leave a comment. All of that really helps in recommending this channel to a larger audience. And if you are an author, I would love to speak with you about your book. Until next time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.